Thank you, Pete. Well, I hope you've been enjoying our summer series on 12 Who Dared. I hope you've been enjoying some of the skits we've been doing. We've had a good time with them. I want to thank Jeff for being willing to come up and be berated last week by his younger brother, and we had fun with that. And of course, we've met Peter and Andrew, and we've met Mary and Martha, so a couple other siblings, and Mary Magdalene we met, and Matthew. It's just been fun. But I want to emphasize that when the worship design team looked at this whole series, we decided, it'd be kind of overkill to do a skit every week. Make it kind of special. So we're not having skits, and that's probably good because today would be a really hard skit to do. So it's probably better we just leave that one alone. Back in the 40s, one of the social phenomenon, especially on college campuses, was swallowing goldfish. Any of you old enough to remember that? That was before my time. Did you ever do it at Sylvan? No, okay. Then in the 50s, I guess it was cramming as many people you could into a phone booth, which most of these kids don't even know what a phone booth is anymore, but or a Volkswagen Beetle. So there's always been these kind of, throughout time, these social phenomena. Well, 1974, there was another social phenomenon that kind of hit the campuses, spread beyond campuses, but became kind of a popular social phenomenon. So popular, in fact, that a songwriter by the name of Ray Stevens wrote a song about it, went to #1 and stayed there for 3 weeks. It was a really dumb song, which most of Ray Stevens' songs were dumb, which is what made them so popular. And I was going to show you a clip of that, but I thought that might be kind of offensive to you too. But you just remember the one verse, "Don't look, Ethel." Remember that one? "Don't look, Ethel." Too late. But anyway, this phenomenon was called streaking. And for some reason, only God knows where it came from or why anybody did it. But suddenly, across campuses all over the United States, in the spring of '74, kids were just throwing off all their clothes and running across campuses or other places. I know, this is kind of strange, isn't it? I mean, weird. But at that time, I was at Emory University. Barb and I were down there. I was a student in seminary, and being a serious student of cultural phenomenon, it was decided one night that this phenomenon needed to be studied up close and personal. And so Barb and I and some friends of ours in campus housing there decided we should go out and see what was going on campus, because we heard these stories. And so we went out, and there were literally hundreds of students out just walking, just waiting. And every once in a while, someone would say, "There's one!" And you look off in the distance, it was dark, and you'd see just this white flash of a body go running past way out in the distance. And maybe there'd be a group of them. It's kind of like going out looking for deer in northern Minnesota at dusk. But there's another one, Afterwards, we decided to go to Everybody's Pizza for some pizza. That was down in the village, and we were sitting having pizza, and all of a sudden the door of the men's bathroom just swung open real fast, and I didn't see it. I had my back to it, but somebody went tearing through the pizza parlor and said, "There's another one." That was enough to, kind of, if it hadn't been Everybody's Pizza, which was great pizza, I probably would have stopped right there. But, but it was great. It was, what a strange phenomenon. Every once in a while, even to this day, you'll hear somebody at a ball game or someplace else tries to streak. There was also that famous incident of Academy Awards. Anybody remember that one? David Niven giving out, I can't remember what prestigious award it was, and all of a sudden a guy bolted across him live TV. I won't say what David Niven said. It was quite funny, but it was probably inappropriate. But streaking wasn't something that was invented in 1974. We have a case right here in Scripture where there is a streaker. A young fella who ran through the streets of Jerusalem stark naked. But it wasn't because he chose to do so. The Scripture setting today is the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we have that story, which is repeated throughout the Gospels. But in this particular Gospel of Mark, only in this Gospel, are these two verses mentioned. Now, I remember a few weeks ago we talked about the beloved disciple and the mystery behind who is this beloved disciple. Well, here we have another mystery. Because suddenly there's another disciple who goes unnamed, and there's been all kinds of speculation about who this person was. Some think it was James, the brother of Jesus. Some people think it was James the apostle. But this is what it says: a certain young man. Many believe probably by in that day and age, that means he might have been 12 or 13 years old, was following Jesus. So he'd come to the Garden of Gethsemane following Jesus. And he was wearing nothing but a linen cloth. And they, meaning the guards, caught hold of him. But he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. Now, I attempted to find some commentator that would say that naked didn't really mean naked. It meant that he had some undergarments on. But the commentators I read said, no, in the Greek, this means he was stark naked, running back through the garden and back through the city, back home, or wherever it was that he had come from. So who was this man, and this young boy or young adult, and why was he following Jesus? Why did he have just a linen cloth on? Who was this person? Well, probably the vast majority of biblical scholars have suggested that this is none other than the author, or at least the traditional author of this book, Mark, whose name was actually John Mark. John Mark, John being his Hebrew name, Mark being his Greek name. He's a fascinating person, this John Mark. We run into him several times in the book of Acts. What we learn about him in the book of Acts is that his mother's name was Mary, Acts 12:12. Peter has been in prison. He has a miraculous release from prison, and he goes to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where the church was meeting, the Christian community was meeting. So we learn two things from that he had a mother named Mary, this John Mark, and that he apparently lived in Jerusalem. He was not one of the 12 disciples. We learn later on in the book of Acts that he had a cousin by the name of Barnabas. Remember Barnabas? Barnabas and Paul were on a missionary trip, and they took this young man along with them, this John Mark. Now, this would be 20 years after the fact, so he'd probably be maybe late 20s. And they took him along with them, and we're told that on the way, at some point, John Mark, for whatever reason, he got homesick or whatever, he left them and went back home. And this grated Paul. This made Paul very upset because several years later, Barnabas and Paul were ready to go on another missionary trip. And this time again, Barnabas said, well, let's take my cousin John Mark along with us again. And Paul said, no way are we taking him. We can't trust him. We're not going to take him. And there was such a confrontation between Paul and Barnabas that they split. And they each went their own way. And Paul took Silas and Barnabas took John Mark, and they each began their own missionary journeys at that time. Later on, in one of the letters of Paul, it becomes evident that he and John Mark were reconciled at some point in time. So that's a little background on this guy named John Mark. As I mentioned, many people believe that the basis of the Gospel of Mark is based upon John Mark's writings or his sharing of the gospel story with others. And so the question comes, well, why in this gospel do we have these two verses? And one of the answers seems to be that there's an attempt made to identify the author within the pages here without naming him. It's as if to say that I, John Mark, am the one who saw these events. I was there. As a very young person, but I was there. I was there in the Garden of Gethsemane. The question many ask is, why was he there? And one of the speculations is that the Last Supper occurred in Mary's home, his mother's home, and that John Mark was present for the Last Supper, for the institution of what we now call communion. That maybe he helped with it as one of the young people in that household. And that later in the evening, for whatever reason, he decided when Jesus and the disciples left, he decided to follow them. Why he only put on a linen cloth around himself, we don't know. It's just a mystery. But for whatever reason, he decided to follow Jesus. And he followed him all the way to the garden. And he was maybe the only eyewitness to what happened in the garden, because the rest of the disciples went to sleep. But he watched, he saw, and he was able later to record what happened there. And then when the guards came to arrest Jesus and the disciples fled, as they arrested Jesus for whatever reason, they saw this young lad there, and they went to maybe question him, or maybe they went to arrest him. And you can imagine a little struggle went on, and they grabbed him, and he wiggled out of his sheet, and off he went home to escape. Well, there's a number of things that we can learn from this disciple. First of all, he was very young, but there was something that drew him to Jesus. There was something that attracted him to Jesus, that compelled him to go out in the middle of the night and follow Jesus. And if he was the one who was grabbed after the other disciples fled, he was the one that hung in there to the very end. He stayed next to Jesus as long as he could until he risked being arrested himself. He stayed with Jesus till the very last moment. Now, there's a great mystery about this person, and we can't definitely say for sure exactly who he was. We can speculate, or why he was there. But many throughout the centuries have taken these stories of Scripture and put symbolic meaning to them. So regardless of who this person was, regardless of why he was there,